Thanks for tuning in to the Marvel Movie Minute.
Want to skip those pesky ads and get early access?
Become a member at truestory.fm/join and discover all the other great perks that come with it.
Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a weekly podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 5 minutes at a time. In this, our 8th season, we are looking at Thor: The Dark World. I'm Pete Wright.
No, I'm Pete Wright.
You're doing that thing again.
I am. I'm actually Matthew Fox. But I wish it could be Pete Wright, as do all of us.
Almost Pete Wright. Today, we are talking about minutes 31 through 35 of Thor: The Dark World, which begins with Odin doing his best grumpy immortal dad impression and Jane Foster realizing her vacation to Asgard comes with a side of cosmic parasite and ends with a crash course in ancient space goo, dark elf pinups, and the dawning realization that Asgard's magical healthcare plan does not cover Aether-related emergencies. Welcome to the mythology dump.
I'm glad that you had the same thought I did about healthcare, because I was going to make a joke about how this is one hell of an MRI machine, but I did not see Jane get prior approval. So we've got, I think Asgard is out of network.
They have gone rogue.
American health insurance companies.
Absolutely true. They've absolutely gone rogue. And I imagine it's hard for healthcare workers, for insurance operatives to even watch this movie because, come on.
What are you going to do? But I will say, tell me if you'd agree with me. I think you kind of mentioned it with mythology lore and all that. To me, my understanding of these minutes was we get some bickering with Jane and Odin has some great lines. Mm-hmm. We get the Warriors 3 kind of marching some people in. But the best way to describe most of these 5 minutes is holy exposition Batman. Because we get an awful lot of exposition. We get an awful lot of the questions that we've been asked hinted at, but not actually answered. But mostly we learned that I don't know. I'm still lost, but at least I have more. Like, I now am looking at the walls of the place in which I'm lost. So that's something, good? Right? That's something.
This is an interesting minute. This is what we have come to call the Book of the Vampire minute, right? There's always a Book of the Vampire, and it might be a person, it might be a book, it might be a podcast. Whatever you're doing in a movie like this, you're going to be moving along just fine, and then suddenly someone's going to stop and take a minute and tell you what's going on and why. And it's in the earliest of vampire lore, right? In Dracula, in Nosferatu, in all of these early books, these adaptations, we would have this point where they'd stop and say, here's a giant book and it's made of leather and wood and it has a giant metal padlock on it. And if you unlock it and open it, it creaks. And inside are all of the secrets to what you are dealing with right now. That it usually says vampire on the cover of it. Mm-hmm. That's what we have
with a Y,
here.
Not an
with
I.
a Y, yes. That's why we have the Book of Yggdrasil in this minute. That's the book of the Asgardian vampire, and it's telling us everything we've already seen. It is a confirmational minute because it's telling us all about the stuff that we've actually seen Malekith doing already.
So I'm going to admit an area in which I watch movies while you watch films. Because I am not perhaps a top-level movie critic. I like exposition.
You're
I
okay
think
with
exposition can be handled badly, but I find that way too often I'll hear people be like, oh, that was just an exposition dump. Like, I am laughing at how much this was an exposition dump, but I don't think that's bad necessarily, especially when it can be done in a way. And I will say probably where this comes from for me is that the first movies I ever saw and the first movies I ever really fixated on started with yellow text scrolling across the screen in the most blatant exposition you've ever seen.
Yes.
And frankly, I wish a lot more movies did that.
The scroll of the vampire. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. You will not be faulted by me for that. I think there are some really important places for exposition. And I think cognitively, sometimes we need exposition just to remind us that what we're seeing, we understand, right? That's a useful tool. And sometimes it's used badly and sometimes it's used for good. And, it's a spectrum like everything else in our cinematic tastes. In this case, I don't really mind it. I like the idea that there is a Book of the Vampire. And frankly, it allows all of our principal characters to get caught up, right? Because even though Odin already knows the lore and Thor and Jane really don't, putting them all around the book catch them up to each other. Now, Odin knows that Jane's condition is super serious, and Thor and Jane know that Odin is on sort of Team Jane. Let's figure out what's going on. And we'll come to terms with what the Dark Elves are doing. That's not a bad thing structurally. It's not the most exciting 5 minutes for us to pull apart, but it's okay.
I mean, it's a lot better than a lot of the other 5 minutes we've had so far.
Right. It's written on the tin. That's what we get. So go ahead.
I'll say this. I feel like, to me, I think another thing that makes it more interesting, and again here, this is are we judging this movie as is, or are we judging this movie within the larger MCU? Because to what extent do you believe that in terms of this exposition, Odin is a reliable narrator? Are we learning the sort of objective truth, or are we learning what Odin understands about what is happening here?
Isn't that a great question for the entire franchise of Thor? Is Odin the reliable narrator? We've talked about it already a little bit because of Odin's sort of, I don't know, Asgard washing of his history, and we'll definitely see that in future Thor movies. But right now, do we trust what Odin is saying? We sort of do. I think we take it on a little bit of faith because he's opening this book. And the book surely is wiser than Odin.
I think what I trust is, and we'll get to a question about whether Bor was a reliable narrator.
Yes.
But I think I trust that that Odin is giving his best understanding of the metaphysics of all of this. And that compared to the voiceover we get that describes the Infinity Stones in, I think, Infinity War, I'm not sure which one it is, but there's one of the movies where we get this actual purely objective, it seems, voiceover explaining the birth of the reality of the Infinity Stones. And maybe I'm just doing this because I want things to line up and it's not to just feel like it got retconned. But I feel like there are things that he says that we later learn are not the case. But I can fully believe this is what Asgardians believe. Like, he says that these are relics that existed before the universe.
Right.
When we're later told that they basically were created at the moment of creation of the universe, the Big Bang. And that's fine. That's metaphysics stuff. He talks about them as relics. He never uses the word stones and refers to them as that some of them were stones, but that the ether, that the reality power was not necessarily.
That's a really important thing. I want to footnote that. So continue.
But so I think there's a couple other things he says like that are sort of like, clearly that what he is saying was not written by people who already knew what they were going to write in Avengers Infinity War and all the rest of these things. But I was kind of waiting for him to say something that was so directly contradictory that I was like, oh, look, they just ignored this movie. Whereas I feel like the way he says things are enough based in, this is what I know because of what my father told me and because of Asgardian mythology and lore, that for him to get it wrong, it makes, to me, it's just like the Swedish people who found the Tesseract 1,000 years ago. Like, they're giving their understanding of it because they're putting it into the words that they had in 800s Sweden, or whatever is now Sweden. And so, I guess to me, like, that's, I was kind of waiting for this moment to be like problematic, but it really, I don't think was. I think this was we're getting what Thor and Odin understand of it, and we'll get the more sciencey side of it in later movies. But for this, the mythology, it does still line up.
I think it does. And I am thrilled that you're as optimistic as you are, noting where the baseline already is. The thing that I think is interesting is that they do say that this thing, the Dark Elves are born of eternal night, and that Malekith made a weapon out of that darkness, and it was called the Aether. While the other relics often appear as stones, the Aether is fluid and ever-changing. It changes matter into dark matter. Then goes on to say it seeks out host bodies, drawing strength from their life force. That explains the Jane part. But I want to go back to this first part, right? The other relics often appear as stones, indicating maybe at some point in history they appeared in other forms as well. The Tesseract certainly, has that case to be made, right? It was a stone. It was a thing it was broken apart. It was reassembled. Like, it had a lot of stuff going for it, the Tesseract. So this one indicates to me exactly what you're saying, that maybe this was the intention behind writing the Aether this way, was to and maybe it's an indication that they actually were further down in the Infinity Saga brand book than I've been giving them credit for.
Well, let me ask you then, because they're not inventing the Infinity brand book, as you said, for this MCU, because it did to some extent already exist within Marvel Comics.
Right.
So how does what they're saying line up with Infinity Stones in the comics?
They were gems. They were gems. They were all gems. There was no Aether. That's an artifact of the MCU. So, to that extent, they are adapting pretty liberally the Infinity Saga as pieced together over the comics.
Right.
And this kind of I can't believe I'm saying this out loud. This kind of works. I've been such an antagonist to what I perceived as a retcon. This actually is the first hint. It's a breadcrumb that I have been watching the movie wrong. And in fact, they knew more. And I think part of it is we got to just going back to narrative storytelling, that maybe I just wasn't paying close enough attention, because exposition dumps I tend to tune out a little bit. Right? I see them coming.
I think that's fair. And I do think, and I mentioned that Odin has some bangers. We'll quote them later. But Odin has a number of lines he says to Jane or to Thor about Jane being there that are very kind of high fantasy, Shakespearean. And I think for me, that kind of helps put into that remind me of, like, this isn't a sci-fi movie as much as it's a fantasy movie. Yes. And what I'm being told is lore. I'm not being told science. And for me, and I'm going to get into another theology point in a second, because they brought up some stuff that's theological that I got real excited about, and I'm going to geek out all over this. And people can skip ahead or dive in with me. But I think that what they were kind of doing there was saying, like, what he is telling you is legends and lore and myth, and they believe it, but, like, they don't have any firm idea, like, this is the scientific, like, I can measure the ether in this way. And I think so for that, it allows me to feel like it's not supposed to be exact, and that's okay. Yes.
I think that is okay. And I think in that regard, these minutes are, they're not bad. In the scope of this movie, they're not bad.
First, second, third, and fifth, I thought were all pretty decent. The Malekith shows up, and then we get spaceships, and it's sci-fi, and it feels real weird. But let me ask, before I get to the theology part, let me ask you about the one part that we know is unreliable. And the question here now is Odin an unreliable narrator? Is Bor an unreliable narrator? Or are they just both ignorant? Which is that Odin says with utter assurance, the dark elves are all dead. Why? Because my father Bor killed them all. And I just don't remember, I don't really think it was made clear. Do you think that Bor knew that Malekith and some of them escaped?
The way I hear it is that Bor fought a valiant fight, and in valiant fights, sometimes body count is not always reliable. And when you come back to your ale around a table to celebrate the victories won, it's pretty easy for the stories to get ahead of the facts, and they become the lore. Was Bor intentionally, willfully unreliable? I don't think so. Did history get ahead of itself? That's where I'm leaning. And I think that's what the son of Bor, Odin, as the son of Bor, inherited, was a belief that his father did, the right thing as leader and king, and believes that about dad. Like, that would challenge a lot of significant identity. So, Bor killed them all. And the way he says it, because it's Hopkins, I think implies subtext of, it's bad news. He killed them all. He killed them all. no, I don't think he takes that kind of thing lighthearted, Odin.
Right. Which is definitely, it's one of the ways in which I think in a lot of ways, this movie is to me the MCU Attack of the Clones. Attack of the Clones is the second of the prequels, and I think by many it's generally regarded to be, in terms of like actual movie making, probably the worst of the Star Wars movies. There are people who dislike other movies a lot more than it, myself included, but it's just not good for most people, I think. But it does both set up and resolve a lot of important plot dynamics where, like, I think if you haven't seen it, you probably don't understand a lot of the larger Star Wars story. And I feel like this is very much the same. And I do wish that this had somehow come up in the first movie, because I think that this question of, do you defeat the frost giants or do you wipe out, do you genocide the frost giants? And whether Thor is going to think that what his father wants is for him to wipe out the frost giants. That takes on a new meaning when you understand that Odin is carrying this, you know?
Yes.
And maybe it got mentioned in the first movie, but then maybe it should have come up in the second movie, you know? Like, even just like a flash of recognition on Thor's face or something about like, is that why you didn't want me to kill the frost? You know, that'd be a nail on the head, but you know, some way of working that in.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think I do agree with you. I like that idea that, yeah, maybe at the moment Bor was like, you know, maybe one of his lieutenants came up to him and was like, yeah, we don't actually have Malekith's body. And he was like, okay, well, we'll think about that later. And then they had a few drinks and he thought about, should I send out some expeditions to try and hunt him down? And if Malekith is still alive, he'll let us know. And then thousands of years go by and there's not a word from Malekith. Yeah. So I like that idea that it's an unreliable narrator, but not by intent in any way.
Yeah. Right. Are you ready to get into your theological corner?
And this might be a quick thing. I don't know how much we're going to dwell on this, but to me, it was really exciting. We learn in these minutes that Norse mythology and theology and just way of understanding the world is eschatological. And that's a highly technical term. Do you have any idea what I mean when I say that?
I do, but please define it for your context.
Sure. Basically, it's the idea that different cultures, and often, but not always, often this is based in their ideas of mythology. And this exists long before we actually knew the answer to this. But some cultures had an idea of the world as cyclical, of, you know, that reality and time goes in cycles and everything has happened before and everything will happen again. Other cultures have what is called an eschatological view of things, which means that there's a clear understanding that history has a beginning point and an end point, and that the world was created in some moment and that the universe will end in some moment. And again, now scientifically, we do have some understanding, at least of the beginning of it, although we can still argue that there was, you know, what happened before the Big Bang. Like, there's still room for both cyclical and that. I'm not even talking in that terms of science. It's more in terms of like the Christian idea of starting with Genesis and then going to the end times, you know, and when Jesus will bring about his kingdom and all of that. That's a very eschatological view of things. And a lot of pre-Christian or pre-Abrahamic cultures, the Abrahamic religions, you know, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, a little bit Zoroastrianism, things like that, they're all very eschatological and it's very much tied to their idea of monotheism. A lot of the pagan, or however you want to define them, pre-Abrahamic, pre-colonized cultures were not. They were cyclical. A lot of Chinese philosophy is often like that. Not all, and I'm not going to claim I'm a huge expert on that, but that's, you know, one good example. So is Indian, Hindi kind of ideas, very cyclical. And in this, and one thing that's been pointed out is that Norse mythology and actual mythology is eschatological in a way that like a lot of other mythologies of the peoples around them were not, like Celtic mythology and stuff like that. But they have this idea of the beginning and they have the idea of the end, Ragnarok. That's when the universe will stop and will end. And here, Odin says, you know, the 9 realms were not eternal. He said they had a dawn and thus they shall have a dusk. And I just kind of lit up at that because like, oh, that's a confirmation of this is an eschatological philosophy of the world. They understand that time is linear and that there's a beginning and an end, and whatever they're doing is somewhere in the middle. So I just thought that was really cool that they kind of like, and they may have had no idea kind of what they were doing and signifying that, but just naming that specifically, that the realms are not eternal. I just really appreciate, I really like that moment.
Sort of an adjacent question.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that's interesting about that whole conceit, and the fact that it's Odin that's actually driving that conversation, right, discussing the dawn and the dusk, puts him in the position of being a sort of priestly or a prophetic figure, right? He's a prophet.
Right.
It's talking about these kinds of things. And I am actually curious how the Norse mythology looks at prophets, at the figure of a prophet, because we've got that in Christianity. And what is the parallel here? Because Odin is the definition of the collapse of the separation of church and state, right? Like here he is quoting prophecy, and he's also the king. How does that play?
So Odin is the god that is most associated with prophecy and wisdom. And that's where the stories of why he only has one eye is that he basically made a deal with Raven, or the Raven God, or various versions of that, but where he gave up his eye to wisdom in order to have like another kind of sight. And within Norse mythological practice today, and I think this is true of like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and that they based this on that, but I am not a complete scholar. There are events called oracular saves, which are kind of like a sacred ceremony in which a person becomes, as they understand it, an oracle of Odin. And often they will dress like him and cover one eye and things like that. And, you can say it's kind of akin to if you take out like a lot of the fraud that happens in this, but like, the Oracle of Delphi and like modern day, like fortune telling and tarot and any of those kind of things, like, generally a person comes with a question, and at least in the ones I experienced, I didn't go to many, but I probably went to half a dozen or so with like 3 or 4 different people in the chair at various times. No one's going to say to you, like, on what day will this person die, but they will give like some attempts of wisdom. And there were some who would say, like with tarot or any of those things, there were some who will say that they fully believe that they are being possessed by the wisdom of Odin in that moment. And others who will say that they're just going on, what they're being guided to. But definitely Odin is very associated. And anything that I've ever seen having to do with prophecy is always tied into Odin in some way, because he is definitely the god of, and that even when you like cast runes, which are probably actually a better, equivalent to tarot. Runes are these different stones that have had like different, the different pictures that are runes carved on them. And like tarot cards, they have meaning and they get interpreted. And when you do that, I think you're also supposed to do some kind of an invocation of Odin or something like that.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about it like that, because Odin, here he is in this position of ultimate prophetic authority, and yet at the same time runs headlong into a cosmological ill that he cannot see around, right? He can't see what the other side of this thing is. This is his collision with sin and suffering in his world and beyond. Right. And I think that's interesting. Is this suffering random? Is this suffering an eschatological, foreboding? Or is there a higher purpose that the ether has imbued itself inside Jane, and now she's sitting there with all the Asgardian helpless healers.
It's a question. We should get back to the ether in a second because of Malekith's role in he didn't create it, but he did create it. That's kind of where that stuff gets me lost. But I think it's also worth noting prophecy and drama do not work well together.
Truth. Yes.
Because if someone can say, I predict that this will happen, and so everyone prepares for it to happen, and then it does happen, that's not a very good story. Right. And so generally, if you're going to have prophecy in a story that's not like a specific religious text, like, the Quran or the Bible or something like that, you either have to have that the prophet can be wrong or that the prophet will not be listened to. And those can both make great stories. And so I think that means probably part of why, if Odin is predicting, like if Odin had a vision of the dark elves are going to return, this becomes a fundamentally different movie.
Yes.
And it's much more, I think, Odin's movie than it is Thor's. And so I'm guessing that's probably why, like, Odin as a prophet just doesn't fit the dramatical structure that they're going for with this movie.
Right.
Or with any of these movies, really.
I think that all of this is what gives us some meat to these 5 minutes, and I think that they're actually pretty solid. Right. I do think there are some thin pieces. There is another interesting bit of MCU history that I want to make sure we call out, that the Book of Yggdrasil, this is not the first time we have come in touch with it in the MCU. It is not an artifact of the comics, the book itself. There are lots of references to the magic books, like to the books of lore and mythology, but never to the Book of Yggdrasil. In fact, do you remember the last time a principal character came in touch with the Book of Yggdrasil?
No idea.
It was a young man by the name of Johann Schmidt, who opened essentially a Midgardian version of the book and got himself Red Skulled. That's where he learned. That's where Red Skull learned of the Tesseract in the book. That's about it. Case, I don't think we see that anywhere else.
I think that is not this is a sacred book that has power in and of itself in a cosmological way. This is the book of people on Earth in Scandinavia writing down their understandings of these things.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But, I think it's interesting that it ties directly to these two books are like, when you look at, for example, the Marvel Cinematic Universe wiki, those are the two references besides Lego Marvel's Avengers, the game, where this book is referenced. It's Johann Schmidt and it's this movie. This book has no other connection as far as we know right now.
I guess to me where I'm getting lost, and this is very metaphysical, we don't need to spend time on this, is I would not describe those as the same book.
It is referenced as an earthly version of the book.
Okay. Fair enough.
Which I think is more grist for the critical mill. Right.
Right. Like, to me, it's more equivalent to like someone found an early copy of the Bible versus, and I'm not saying I hold to this metaphysical theological framework, but if you did, someone went to heaven and found a book that God had written for the angels, giving the actual truth of things. That's why I have trouble thinking of them as the same thing. But if they say they're the same thing, there's an earthly version, then fair enough. Speaking of creation's tales that don't really make sense, so the relics exist before time, before the realms. And that's a time of utter darkness. And first of all, we're giving a kind of morality to darkness versus light, which I don't really love, but fair enough. And the dark elves realm, and they're unchecked, and they're just everywhere. And we are told that Malekith forges the darkness into a weapon, aka the Aether. And this is the part where I have to most think this is a false understanding of what happened, because I don't see how that makes any sense or fits any of the ideas that we have of the reality stones, of the infinity stones, infinity gems, whatever you want to call them. Okay. Am I missing something here?
I think that the grace I have to give it is similar to yours, because even as these minutes give me a hint that maybe we knew exactly where we were going and that we can reproduce the steps that it takes to get there as, general fans of the arc of these stories. I do think that there is some liberty taken in just the straight up script that feels incomplete.
Yeah. I think for me, the only way I can make sense of it is if you say reality stone is to soul stone as Aether is to Tesseract. and that like the Tesseract isn't actually the Soul Stone. The Tesseract is this thing that people use and think has its own power and awesomeness because they don't realize that it is at its heart the Soul Stone. And
right,
so the
right.
idea
And that's why when Schmidt opens the box and sees the glowing thing come out of it, he sees this thing that he can't manipulate because he doesn't yet understand it. And yet he's still able to make the goo guns that disintegrate people. Yeah.
And fair enough. And yeah, so I think it's the same thing to me is that like, so the ether may be a thing that Malik, in the same way that Schmidt and even to some extent Nick Fury was able to make things from was able to kind of do things with the Tesseract, that Malekith may have made the ether using the Reality Stone. And that's a story that gets passed down because the Asgardians have no reason to know about all the other stones, but so Malekith may have made the ether, but he definitely did not make the Reality Stone.
That's never addressed in any of the subsequent lore via flashback. And it's yet again another example of why it's so hard to consider this hardcore canon when the Dark Elves are, erased.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
No, I mean, I get it.
So let's talk about some of the cool lines that Odin has.
Please.
Because I'm ready to just have some fun with these minutes now. And these all happened within like 30 seconds. And you just know Anthony Hopkins is having so much fun chewing the scenery with these. As sort of Jane, first of all, like has this moment where she's like, oh, the Asgardian MRI, you call it a soul forge. I call it a quantum field replicator. And they give some explanation about energy, and she's like, the made-up words that I use match the made-up words that you use. She's very proud of herself. Fair enough. Thor's very proud of her. And then Odin enters, just the kind of thing fathers would normally say. Are my words mere noises to you that you ignore them completely? And then they talk about her and why she is sick and that she's infected, and so she has to be cared for. And he says she is mortal. Illness is their defining trait, which
so good.
As someone who got strep all the time, I can't really argue too much, but still kind of mean. And then he goes a little bit further and he says, she does not belong here in Asgard any more than a goat belongs at a banquet table.
Perfect.
Now, I will say goats belong on a banquet table. So just make sure we're clear about that. Goat is good eating. But yes, I get what he's saying. And then, of course, Jane has this moment of, did he just? And I kind of love it because I don't think in any way, shape, or form Odin has malice towards Jane. I don't think he in any way, shape, or form is trying to insult her or hurt her. I think it's that this is going to sound patronizing and condescending because we think of ourselves as humans as the apex, but we are actually condescending and patronizing to insects all the time because we don't think of them as on our level. And that's what Odin is. Like, to me, that's what all these lines are, is he has no malice for Jane. He has no any more than you do for, well, actually, no, I have malice towards a lot of bugs, but like, towards, whatever small life form is bothering you in that moment. And that you have to teach your son, like, no, like, take the squirrel outside. You can't bring that squirrel into the house.
Well, I agree with that. I do think, though, that there is that the target of Odin's ire right now isn't Jane really at all. It's Thor, right? He's mad at Thor for bringing her here, and he's using words that target Jane and her species by way of trying to make a paternal point, which is just him being a jerk. And
it's a son who has brought the stray cat into the house.
Yes.
You're insulting a stray cat just to make the son realize why they shouldn't have done this.
Right. And note how quickly Odin turns from the antagonist in the scene to, someone with a real affinity to Jane once he finds out exactly what she is afflicted with. Once the Aether responds, he's all up in it. He's interested. He does his fancy king wave of his hand over her arm and sees the Aether in her veins. I don't know. That's a thing. Why wasn't he there the whole time? Can everybody do that? That's just a Odin thing.
Who knows? Maybe it's because it comes out in that moment. But
yeah,
I will say I want to give the filmmakers and the writers credit here that I think there's an important point to be made throughout our society about how, while we have been like really upholding the importance of STEM and STEM studies in our schools, that STEM without the liberal arts is problematic. And I think we have a moment here where we see that Jane is amazing at STEM, but needs some basic English comprehension lessons. Because if I say she has no place here, like a goat has no place at a banquet, that is what we call an analogy. And while Britta from Community might describe an analogy as a hat, as an idea wearing another idea as a hat, that is not accurate. It is just saying, you are like this as something else is like that. And so when she says, did he just compare me to a goat? No, you need to go back to high school English and learn what analogies are. He did not make a simile. He made an analogy. He said that the relationship between you and Asgard is similar to that of a goat to a banquet table.
But she was still so exuberant over the fact that you told your dad about me.
Oh my God.
Like,
oh my God.
Yeah, it's quippy. Like, this is the quippiest way to move us through this sequence and give Jane some more sort of laugh lines. But frankly, I don't know. I mean, I think the world of Natalie Portman, and I think those quippy lines are meant for Kat Dennings, and somehow she ended up with them in this sequence. And I don't know if she's as funny.
I think pull them off trying to give us a character who is both a world famous top 10 minds on Earth, brilliant person, and also a besotted lovesick teenager who gets super excited that her boyfriend talked to her about her dad. I think that's possible. I think it's a great character to write. I think it's a great character to act. I think Natalie Portman could play that character with good direction. I think it was terribly acted and terribly directed.
As much as I find it charming, and I mean, ultimately, I like it. I think it's cute. I see through it. I see through it. Yeah.
But great lines all. We got to have those fun moments. Odin got to choose some scenery. We liked it. Yeah.
And the Soul Forge is a cool bit of CG, right? I like the particulate effects. I like the way they outline the body. I think it is eye candy, which is a nice way to dress up a kind of, boring scene. I also like the room of Yggdrasil, right? Looking up at the realms above is beautiful. And I think it's just a part of Asgard to celebrate that the art direction, the design of the world is lovely around every corner. I think it is well portrayed.
I think that's really true. And I think that this is why so much of the Dark Elf stuff leaves me cold. And I've gone on these rants before, as have you. I don't want to go too deep into it, but I'll just say in these moments, because then when we cut to the Dark Elves on their spaceship, they are looking at that same idea of the convergence and all the realms on a computer screen.
Yeah.
And it just, like, if you'd set something up that these are like technological and not interested in mythology, I think you could have had something there. But instead, it just looks so weird after the beautiful mythology. And knowing that the Dark Elves, like, where were they around when technology was happening? Like, and granted, like, the Asgardians are on a much slower clock. They've had technology a lot longer than we have. But and then, like, there's this weird moment where Malekith makes one of his people into total darkness that, frankly, I'm happy not talking about because it just makes no sense and is so out of nowhere. But again, there we get mythology. We get, you're going to sacrifice yourself and become this essence of darkness and go to defeat our ancient enemies. And you're going to do it in a spaceship. And we see spaceships flying away. And I was just like, come on. Like,
ancient spaceships. Yeah.
No.
They are creatures
of lore. Pick a lane.
We do have, like, at the end, we got the Warriors 3. They bring back Curse, but not a lot happens. And so I feel like we can table that until next week.
I agree.
Where we dive into the well-lit sub-basement of Asgard. Anything else on your hot list?
No, we'll talk about the Warriors 3 and the dumb fat-shaming joke that there's no place for when we get back.
Boy, that was tough. It's a tough way to welcome them back to Asgard. I agree. Here we go.
I'm trying.
Thank you.
I had a lot of nice things to say about these minutes.
You did. You really did. You came to play today, Matthew. Yeah. I'm proud of you. I'm proud to do this show with you. It took us, we've crossed the half hour and we have found some joy. And I can't wait till next week to see if we can break it all down.
I want you to understand the utter joy I have ripping apart this monstrosity of a movie. Like that is,
here's the real joy.
I'm hoping that I'm at least like, I know people like this movie. I know people like these characters, and I hope you're enjoying throwing things at your podcast screen while you're listening to me. But I hope that there are some potential group of people who hate watch this movie and are enjoying me guiding you through the hate watch while Pete desperately tries to be the summer camp counselor, finding good things in it too for us to enjoy.
Everybody, let's go to mess. Thanks for hanging out with us. We so appreciate you doing that. Don't forget, you can join us in Discord at truestory.fm/Discord. Just sign up and you'll find the Marvel Movie Minute channel. If you are interested in supporting the show, we'd love you to do that. There's a whole team of people that puts this together season after season after season. truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute. Actually, marvelmovieminute.com takes you to the same place. Look at that. We have our own URL. We don't use that enough. We would love it if you would support the show. It's supporting me and Matthew right now. It supports Kyle and Rob last season. It's going to support Matthew and whoever else jumps in for next season. We're very excited as we continue this march through MCU history. So thank you very, very much. On behalf of Matthew Fox, I'm Pete Wright, and we will see you next week.
I'm Matthew Fox, and the Mets are in first place.
Marvel Movie Minute.